Welcome everyone to this another episode of Unlearning the Falsehoods. We are nearly towards the end of this series, and we'll have to wait for Sai Deepak to write the third volume of his Bharat trilogy to continue with our own series of Unlearning the Falsehoods. All right. Now, the things that I'm talking about in this series are largely based on his narrative and the sources that he has mentioned in this book. Those are literary sources. He is building up his arguments based on the literary evidences that he has very well put in this book. Okay, so if somebody is having that urge, because I frequently mention in many of my videos that you're supposed to do your own due diligence, and if you are having that question that where exactly are these sources mentioned, where exactly am I reading it from, all right, so these are all verified sources, because since he has published this book and this book has been out in the public domain since many years, not many years, I would say at least a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, and so yeah, it itself stands testimony to the fact that indeed these sources are genuine and primary, and he's basing his arguments and his reasoning largely on primary sources. All right. So I would very much encourage you to read this book, and I would go as far as saying that these books should be used as history textbooks in our school. At least the second part for the contemporary history. The first part has largely been of um, uh, in the first part, he largely talks about coloniality and how it has impacted rather the consciousness. And he's not just taking the example of Bharat; he has also drawn examples of other previous colonies as well. So I would recommend, if you don't read the first one, do read the second one as well. He has also mentioned many of the sources, and hence this book is more voluminous, because in this book you'll see largely there are more of the sources that he has mentioned verbatim, and hence the book is so voluminous. All right. Now, like I mentioned, Gandhi had awakened a monster. He had created a Frankenstein monster when he elicited help from the Muslims and the Muslim League for non-cooperation movement, and merging the non-cooperation movement with the Khilafat movement. All right. And he had awakened that monster, that Islamic coloniality that you know the cause brought with itself, because Khilafat movement had established and it had firmly established the identity, the Islamic identity, into outside the lands of Bharat, outside the geography of Bharat, meaning their locus of identity was now firmly established in West Asia, not in Bharat, where they were born. And yep. So today we are going to talk about a region that is usually neglected, because that region has been, shielded by some narratives, such as it is a highly literate state, it is the God's own country. Okay, these are the epithets. Yes, I'm talking about Kerala. Kerala has a democratically elected communist government. Yes, in itself sounds as an anomaly. So, so going by the ruling party's political ideology, okay, uh, communism and democracy are two diametrically opposite political philosophies, but more about that in the other videos of this channel. Today we are going to talk about Kerala. Okay, Kerala, in the earlier days, there wasn't any such state as Kerala. Okay, Kerala was known by the name of Malabar Coast, because it is a coast. It has many inhabitable ports. All right. So you'll see that many of the merchants and seafarers traveling from the West Asian region, and even the British, even the Portuguese. British came to Surat for the first time, but it was the Portuguese. I guess Vasco da Gama landed at Calicut in 1493, if I'm not wrong. Okay. So yes, Malabar Coast has been the recipient of many of the Arab merchants and Arab traders coming from that part of the world. Okay, and since they were coming from that part of the world, they were expected by their masters to spread the faith that they bring. So the Arab merchants, they settled on the Malabar Coast and they married local women. Okay, and this is how Islam was spread in that region in the very beginning. Okay. Now, something that you need to keep in mind over here is Vasco da Gama, the Portuguese, they came to Malabar in the year of 1493. So we are taught this um, theory that it was the Mughals and then it was the British that ruled. No, okay, it's not that simple. The history of Bharat from, I would say, hmm, the 13th century up until the 19th century is not as black and white as our history textbooks make it out to be. There were multiple factors at play over here. Okay, so while the Mughals were still establishing their rule, they were still consolidating their rule. The Portuguese had already arrived on the shores of Bharat at Calicut on the Malabar coast. Okay, so this friction, because like I have mentioned, it is a very incorrect political statement to make that neither of the monotheistic traditions were wholeheartedly and willingly adopted by the pagans of Bharat. You either were coerced into it, you either were scared into it. So majority and almost all, I would go up until the up to the extent of saying that almost all the converted pagans in the contemporary Bharat, okay, whenever they started their either the Christian lineage or the Muslim lineage, whenever they started, the first person to convert will almost always be a forcible convert. Okay, so if there is an example, if there is a proof that you can bring forth, where you can prove beyond doubt that no, this person or this lineage had willingly accepted it, I'm willing to concede that. Okay, so if you have it, my comment sections are always open. You can always drop in your comment and we'll take the conversation forward from there. All right, so let's get into the agenda of the video for today, that is the Mopla genocide. Okay, am deliberately using that word genocide because that is the apt term that describes it. Okay, now let's first of all consider what our history textbooks have taught us. NCERT textbooks don't talk about these things because, for secular reasons, for establishing its secular credentials. But such an event with such a staggering, such a staggering level of brutality and severity has been conveniently brushed under the carpet. Okay, there are many. Even B.R. Ambedkar has written about this. But you'll never see politicians, fighting on the Ambedkarite plank and fighting for the Dalit rights and all those rights. They'll never speak about these things because it is politically inconvenient. Okay, it would not increase their political mileage. But that is why I am here. I'm here to talk about certain uncomfortable truths that we have conveniently brushed under the carpet, and Mopla rebellion is one of them. So, saying that the Mopla riot was out of the blue phenomenon, meaning what other historical sources, largely left-leaning and Marxist-leaning, and the secular historians, what would they tell you? They would tell you that these riots were out of the blue phenomenon. Okay, only the radical elements from a certain community were influenced by these radical ideas. They took the law into their hands and killed a lot of people. Okay, it's an isolated one-time incident, so it's a rebellion. There is no past history, there is no continuum of thought. It is just an isolated, secluded incident, and that is what it is. And you are not supposed to talk about it because it would incite hatred to a certain community because it was only a certain individual who did that. This is largely the secular template that our historians use. Okay, but I'm here to tell you that it's utter bullshit, for the lack of a better word. It's just something that they came up. I don't know what were they smoking when they came up with such theories, but let's leave it to their better imagination. I'm here to bring forth certain evidences that would prove beyond doubt that indeed there was a continuum of thought. These acts of genocide were very well planned and orchestrated and executed by the Mopilas, who had been Islamized, and their clear-cut ambition was the destruction of the pagans' life, pagans' temples. Okay, so let's see. All right. Now the region in focus over here, that is Malabar, has been a center of communal riots since the 1800s, okay, since the 17th century. The Mopla riot or the Mopla genocide took place in 1921. Okay, so from 1700s to 1921, that is 2 centuries and 21 years. So prior to the Mopla rebellion, Mopla riots, Mopla genocide, there were continuous communal friction. Okay, some of them small, some of them large, but there was no authority to take note of it. Okay, the people over there were living under the assumption, because the authorities over there, there wasn't exactly a law and order machinery in place to take care of all these things, to note down, for posterity to judge who exactly was the perpetrator and who exactly was the victim. Okay, so there wasn't exactly any law and order authority like the police that we have in the 1700s and the 1800s. Okay, now what happened after 1900s was, the British had established what? Madras Presidency. Okay, so there was a bare minimum law and order machinery in the towns of the Malabar coast, and thanks to that we have some written records. And the second thing that I would want to mention about here is, people usually make this argument that, the British, they came over here and there are a couple of good things that they did. Okay, I would totally disagree with them, but only I'm only willing to concede that there is only one good thing that the British did over here was, they came over here and they maintained certain records, and hence we have documented evidence of the atrocities and the genocides that were perpetrated by the Muslims on the pagans of those times. Okay, so there is one scholar who goes by the name of William Logan. Okay, he wrote two books. Volume 1, Volume 2 goes by the name of Malabar Manual. Okay, there is another book that is written by Gandhi, that is written by Sankaran Nair in 1922, and the book goes by the name of Gandhi and Anarchy. Another one is the Mapilla Rebellion. It is a 500-page report. It was published by Arthur Rowland Knapp, who was a judge. Okay, he was a judge. Then there is there are multiple books. Okay, the Mopla Rebellion of 1921 and 22 and its genesis by Conrad Wood. Okay, so we are going to draw from these sources. Now, largely what argument is put forward when the pagans talk about the atrocities that were perpetrated on them is that the sources that you are quoting are written by the natives. So there is a clear bias to show the Muslims in the bad light. So here I'm going to read out sources that were written by the British. I'm going to avoid entirely the sources that were written by the native scholars, and those sources are there and they give a pretty bad account and bad description of what was done. So I'm completely neglecting it. There is, a case can be built based solely on the scholarship of the British themselves. You don't need to refer the native scholars. But if you really want to, have an academic depth on these topics, then I would very much encourage you can also refer to those books as well. All right. So yes, now the Arab traders, they married the local women, and they reproduced, and the lineages started. The Muslim conversions were going on. The Islamization, proselytization in Kerala has been going on since the 1400s. Okay, since the 15th century. It's not like overnight Kerala has become a Muslim state. So since the 1400s, the conversion has been going on, and on top of that, Wahhabization has also spread in the contemporary era as well. So you can think about the compounding effect of all the indoctrination of the Wahhabization of all these things, because it has been like 5 centuries since these things have been going on, and on top of that, they have a communist government who have no moral qualms about resorting to violence. Okay, so yeah. It is beyond the scope of this video to talk about all the wrongs that are there in the state of Kerala in the contemporary world. So I would leave it to your due diligence to look into the history of Kerala. Right now we are going to focus on Tipu Sultan, Hyder Ali and his son Tipu Sultan. Okay, here is I would say This is William Logan's book, Malabar Manual. Okay, he writes in this book, and this book was cited by Gopalan Nair in his book. All right, this is a primary source. Let's see what did Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan do to the pagan population of Malabar. Okay, just a side note for this discussion is Tipu Sultan is worshipped in Karnataka as a freedom fighter, and it is a great divide, a great political divide when it comes to the state of Karnataka. So let's look at what William Logan had to say. In March 1789, a Mysorean force of 19,000 men and 46 field pieces surrounded 2,000 Nayars with their families in an old fort at Kuttipuram, the headquarters of the Raja's family, which the besieged defended for several days. At last, finding it untenable, they submitted to Tipu's terms, which were a voluntary profession of the Muslim faith or a forcible conversion with deportation from their native land. The unhappy captives gave a forced assent, and on the next day, the rite of circumcision was performed on all the males. Every individual of both sexes being compelled to close the ceremony by eating beef. This achievement was held out as an example to the other detachments of the army. The Christian and pagan women were forcibly married to the Muslims. Okay, this is a white person speaking about it. This is not me cooking stories out of the blue. All right, so William Logan, he mentions that they were forcefully converted. This again lends weight to the argument that I have made in many of my videos that none of the pagan citizens of Bharat have willfully accepted either of the monotheistic traditions. Okay, if indeed they were willful, all right, the Jains did not, convert people, with the force of sword. The Buddhists did not convert people the way. The Sikhs did not convert people the way, and all of these faiths have come out of the Vedic fold. Okay, so if there are people who are Jains, so they have willingly adopted that faith, but when it comes to Christianity and Islam, they have not willingly adopted these faiths. Okay, so I would very much encourage to look into this idea that is conveniently brushed under the carpet by our historians, that since now they have converted, let's not talk about how they have converted. Let's just talk about now, since they have converted, what now? Okay, again, that is an argument and content for some other video. Right now we will largely focus on this. Okay, again, William Logan writes in his Malabar Manual, Tipu had made repeated vows to honor the whole of people of Malabar with Islam, and would have carried out the vow. The Malabar would have been a Muslim country but for the treaty dated 18th March 1792, under which Tipu was forced to yield Malabar to the East India Company. Okay, this was a stroke of luck. Okay, the work of destiny that saved the pagan of Malabar region to be converted wholesale. Okay, these are the things that have been mentioned in our history text, not in the history textbooks, but these primary sources, and these primary sources have been kept hidden because these things have been on the internet. It's just that we don't look into these things. All right, so yes, very recently as well, the sword of Tipu was discovered, and you could see what was written on the handle of the sword. Okay, it says that for the sake of Islam, I am going to convert so and so people, and it's written on the sword of Tipu Sultan, and Tipu Sultan is considered as a beacon of secularism in Karnataka. You see the contradictions in our public discourse. This is all out there in the open. I'm really shocked. How do people not see this? Okay, appeal to your own sense of reason and see if it makes sense to you. So this is William Logan. He's writing about the situation of the Malabar coast going on in the 1700s. Okay, so the communal fiction, the communal riots, the forceful conversions with the force of the sword were going on in the 1700s in Malabar. Okay, we are still far away from 1921 when the Mopla genocide was perpetrated. We are looking at the background work. Okay, I am building up my argument to appeal to your sense of reason that it wasn't out of the blue that the Mapillas started slaughtering the pagans in the Malabar in 1921, as the secular and the Marxist historians will tell you. Okay, that was not the case. Such events on such a level with such an intensity takes years to build. Okay, these seeds were sown by the preachers of Deoband, preachers of uh, uh, preachers and scholars who were inspired by the theologies and philosophies of Dehlavi, Barelvi, Deoband, Wahhabism. So this is all of the things together in play. Okay, um, I'm not saying that that these things that happened out of the blue, just like the Marxists would claim. No, these things did not happen out of the blue. Okay, these things were deliberately orchestrated, by years and years of watering the plant of radical Islam in the land of Malabar. It's all there in written. You will have to be blind to not see these things. All right. Now, next comes, here is, now what happened was these things were a regular occurrence. These communal clashes, the communal friction between the pagans and the proselytized pagans, it was going on. And now that since the British were there, they had established Madras presidency, so they had some law and order machinery. Okay. And I would say I would be thankful to the British at least for that. Nothing else. At least for that you established the law and order machinery, and not for the fact that since the law and order machinery was there and hence these things were prevented. No, the British, they conveniently turned a blind eye because they themselves were scared for their lives. Okay, I'm thanking them for merely just documenting it, so those records exist. So it is for the posterity to explore these resources. Okay, now here is there was a 3-judge special tribunal. It was constituted in Calicut. Okay, to prosecute the offenders of the Mopla riot of 1921. Okay, this is a 3-judge tribunal. This was their report on these communal clashes. So let's see what the judges of the tribunal had to write about the situation of Malabar. For the last 100 years at least, the Mopla community has been disgraced from time to time by murderous outrages. In the past, these have been due to fanaticism. They have generally blazed out in the Arnad Taluk, where the Moplas were, for the most part, proselytes drawn from the dregs of the pagan population. Dregs of the pagan population meaning people who were downtrodden, who did not see any other means for subsistence. Okay. These men were miserably poor and hopelessly ignorant, and their untutored minds were particularly susceptible to the inflammatory teaching that paradise was gained by killing the Kafirs. Okay, these peoples, they were uneducated. Okay, they were volatile with their emotions, and on top of that, they were uneducated. So they were very much susceptible and vulnerable and impressionable to this inflammatory speeches that the usually the mullahs that they give. Okay, so they were very much susceptible and vulnerable to these speeches of indoctrination, these inflammatory speeches. This is the judges, they are writing in their report. This is not me speaking. They would go out on the war path, killing the pagans, no matter whom, and seek death in hand-to-hand conflict with the troops. In some cases, they may have been inspired by hatred of a particular landlord, but no grievance seems to have been really necessary to start them on their wild careers. These judges are speaking. This is not me speaking. Okay, so if you are still not convinced that no, this was all political, it had nothing to do with religion, it had nothing to do with the pagans and their conversion and their slaughter. Okay, then how do you explain there were 2 specific legislations that the British had to come out with to stop these communal conflicts? Okay, there were 2 specific laws that were passed. One of them was Mopla Outrages Act. Another one was Mopla War Knives Act of 1855. This we are talking about 1855. Okay, almost 8 decades prior to the actual Mopla conflict. Okay, 80 years prior to the actual Mopla riot, there had to be some legislations, laws in place to prevent communal clashes. So this should, you know, tell you about the gravity of the situation. It's not like out of the blue in 1921 the Moplas turned and started slaughtering their pagan neighbors. This is centuries of indoctrination in play over here. Okay, so yeah, there were now two specific laws just to check the Mopla behavior. They were not allowed to carry their knives. They were not allowed to, they were not allowed to, let's say, go out in the open and murder someone with impunity. And this is what I have been stressing so far. The reason why we are discussing this, okay, somebody might say, now, yeah, all that is documented and you're talking with evidences in front of you. That's all right. But is it really relevant today? Why exactly are you talking about these things? The reason why I'm talking about these things, because whenever a crime goes unpunished and unaccounted for, it will bolster your courage to repeat it in the future. Now, I'm not asking you to find the perpetrators and find their descendants and punish them. That is not what I am advocating. But there has to be an in principle acknowledgement of the things that were done. You cannot just simply keep on denying. Okay, it has been more than a century and 3 years since these riots took place. There has been no acknowledgement, nothing whatsoever. So that has to change. There has to be something, and hence then we can talk about justice. The entire edifice, the foundation of the state in 1947 after transfer of power is based on neglecting of injustice that was meted out to the pagans. Okay, yes, now let's focus on a debate. Okay, while passing these legislations, there was this particular individual's H. Forbes. Mr. Forbes, he is making such remarks when these laws were passed in the Imperial Legislative Assembly in 1855. Let's see what he had to say in the Legislative Assembly while legislating and discussing these laws. Okay, this is him speaking, not me. Okay. In 1851, a case occurred in which the victims were mostly men of note. 4 with a servant fell in one neighborhood, after which the criminals walked off about 8 miles and invaded the house of a man of 80 years of age, of large possessions and much consideration. He was brutally dragged out and his body cut to pieces in the presence of frightened tenants. The criminals eventually amounted to 19. They held out for 3 days, repulsed a detachment of native infantry, but were destroyed by a party of Europeans, 4 of whom were killed. So this is in 1851. What would happen was the Moplas, they would go outside, whoever rich person that they saw, they would slaughter them, take over their house, go to another house that they seemed were affluent and wealthy, slaughter them, take over those properties. This was going on in 1851. Okay. In 1852, this is again Mr. Forbes speaking in Imperial Legislative Assembly. This is not me. In 1852, 15 Moplas forced their ways into the house of an influential landlord, butchered the whole of the inmates, consisting of 15 persons, including women and children, and then plundered and burnt the house, an unusually large and substantial one. Then they went from place to place, burning, killing, and wounding, and finally attacked the house of another large proprietor, by whose retainers, after a contest sustained for 3/4 of an hour, they were dispatched. Okay, so what does this tell you? There was rampant lawlessness. They would simply just walk the streets, take over any house that they fancy, that they would see that this house is affluent and wealthy. Let's kill that person and take over that house. It's like the Purge movies. Okay. And now here there is this argument to be made. You will find this secular historians, they will make this argument that since they were landlords, they were rich, and that triggered, but weren't you guys traders? Weren't these the Arab traders, the rich traders that came over here, stayed over here, married local women, converted them, and then started their lineage? Okay. So, Arab traders, they have settled on the Malabar coast since how many years? They even came prior to the Portuguese. Portuguese showed up in 1493. Okay. We are talking about 1852. Okay. So let's assume that even during the 1200s and the 1300s, the Arab traders were here. Okay. So let's say, so for close 6 centuries, the pagans still, you know, managed for 6 centuries. After 6 centuries, they were still the elite, and the Muslims, the converted Muslims, they were still economically downtrodden. Okay. Do you see how ridiculous this argument is? Okay. This is something that you should see. Okay. You should do your own due diligence. Don't take my word for it. Explore the internet for primary sources and you'll find out what is the truth. Okay. You don't need to take my word. So this is rampant lawlessness going on in 1850s. All right. So yeah, there is another scholar who goes by the name of Conrad Wood. Again, a white person. I am completely neglecting. There is one author who goes by the name of Sankaran Nair. He has written elaborately about this Mopla riots and Mopla genocide, but I'm completely neglecting his work. And in a way that is disrespect, because he has painstakingly produced so many primary resources and whatnot. But we are ignoring it just to avoid that blame of being biased. We are focusing only on white authors, that is British authors, because yeah. So here is a detailed thesis from Conrad Wood about the Mopla rebellion. Now, how exactly did they perpetrate this rebellion? Conrad Wood has written a step-by-step procedure. How would they, go about their process of killing the pagans? So let's see what Conrad Wood had to say. These are his words, these not mine. Characteristically, the preparations for an outbreak involved the intending participants donning the white clothes of the martyr, divorcing their wives, asking those they felt they had wronged for forgiveness, and receiving the blessings of a Tangal, as the Sayyids or the descendants of the Prophet are called in Malabar, for the success of their grand undertaking. Okay, so there is a segment in the Muslim class who goes by the name of Sayyids. Now, Sayyids are said to be the descendants of the prophets, of the Prophet, okay, the Prophet of Islam. In the Malabar, that person is named Tangal. Okay, so whenever they had locked in on a target, what would they do? They would be dressed in a white attire. They would divorce their wives because they were pretty much sure inside their head that they were going to be martyred, that they were going to be killed. Okay, so they would divorce their wives. They would wear white clothes. They would seek the blessings of a Tangal. Now, Tangal is, for the lack of a better word, I would say, the leader of the Islamic community in Malabar, because since he was the descendants of their prophet. Okay, now why would they seek their blessing if religion had nothing to do with the Mopla riots? Then why are they seeking the blessings of the descendants of the prophet? Again, an appeal to your reason, something for you to think about. This is again Conrad Wood writing. Once the outbreak had been initiated openly by the murder of their pagan victim, the participants would await the arrival of government forces by ranging the countryside, paying off scores against the pagans they felt had ill-used them or other Moplas, burning and defiling pagan temples, taking what food they needed and collecting arms and recruits. Okay. Let's, for the sake of argument, for a while assume that this Marxist and secular template of economic persecution of the Muslims by the minority of elite Hindus, let's assume for a sake of argument that it is correct. Okay. So if that was the end goal of, the Mopla riot, it would have stopped at, let's say, let's extend some courtesy and empathy to them. which they don't deserve, but let's say for the sake of argument, extend the courtesy and empathy to them, that indeed they were persecuted, indeed they were, exploited by the elite pagan majority who had still managed to stay at land, still managed to stay as landlords after 6 centuries of, forceful proselytization. Let's assume that, okay, the killing would have stopped at after killing that particular individual. They would not have gone so far as destroying and desecrating the temples. What was the point of it? Okay, if the clear goal was economic emancipation, then they would have stopped after occupying positions of power and killing the landlords. But what was the need to desecrate and destroy the places of learning and places of worship, that is, the temples? Again, an appeal to your reason. Think about it, ponder upon it, do your own due diligence, and the comments are always open. If you have a rebuttal, you can always comment on this video. Again, Conrad Wood writes, after seeking the blessings of their religious head, what would they do? Okay. Finally, the government forces closed in on them. A sturdy building was chosen for their last stand. Often the mention of some pagan landlord, frequently the residence of one of their victims, was selected. But the pagan temples, mosques, and other buildings were also used, the main criterion being apparently to avoid being captured alive. Okay. As a Mopla captured at the Payana temple in 1898 put it, it was decided to die there as it was a good building and we were afraid lest we would be shot in the legs and so caught alive. Now, why would they not want to be captured alive? Why were they willingly walking towards martyrdom? Herein comes the idea of, going to the paradise in the service of their faith. That idea comes in. Remember, in the very beginning, I had mentioned that these people, the Moplas, they were, illiterate, untutored, impressionable, very volatile with their emotion. And hence, they were easily impressionable. You can easily indoctrinate them. Okay. You also see contemporary manifestation of these ideologies. Like you'll find people who willingly go to work for ISIS. It is supposed to be the most literate state. All right. So yeah. So this is what happened. They would avoid being captured alive. So they would, they would pick up their sword, keep on killing until it comes to their death. Okay. They would willingly walk towards death and then die. This was written by Conrad Wood, a white person, not a native. Okay. Again, this is Conrad Wood writing. The pattern of the Mopla outbreak was dictated by the fact that participants had no intention of evading the heavy hand of justice. On the contrary, their objective was to compass their own destruction by hurling themselves in a suicidal charge against the forces sent to deal with them. These things speak for themselves. I am nobody to comment on these things, but yes. All right. Now here is William Logan. Okay, he has written a report, Malabar Manual. So William Logan writes in his book of Malabar Manual, Tirurangadi, the Adhikari of which was killed, lay close to the residence of the Arab Tangal or high priest, who was generally credited with having incited the Mappilas to commit these outrages. The Tangal died shortly afterwards and was buried at the Mabram Mosque, situated on the river bank opposite Tirurangadi. Fanatics who intend to commit outrages and those who committed to them, as a rule, even now, proceed to this mosque and to pray at the Tangal's shrine. So if these things had nothing to do with religion, why exactly are going to this person's mosque to pray? Something for you to think about, an appeal to your reason. I don't have to, keep on telling you what is what. It's right in front of you. All right. Now there is something that I want to also bring to the fore over here is, it is usually said, Okay, it is conveniently said by some of the Muslim academics and scholars that since the Moplas, they were fighting in the Khilafat movement, and their pagan neighbors and pagan people who were their neighbors, they were not participating in the Khilafat neighbors. It was justified by them to, enforce Sharia compliant laws, to make them, support their Khilafat movement. Let's assume for the sake of argument that this is correct. Okay, that the pagan neighbors of these Moplas, they were not participating in the Khilafat movement, and the Moplas were justified to use aggressive and coercive measures to make them comply with the movement. Let's assume for the sake of argument that it was correct. Then I would like to draw your attention towards the partition of Bengal, when there were Swadeshi movements. Okay, when the native pagan Bengalis were, protesting against the partition of Bengal. Okay, there were Swadeshi movements going on. So why didn't the Muslims help their pagan brethren to, protest the partition of Bengal? Aren't these two dynamics similar? You guys were afforded the liberty to not choose to participate in a movement. Same liberty, same courtesy was not extended to the Mapilas. You can see a clear distinction in the behavior. Okay? And on top of that, why exactly would the pagan Mapilas help you, in a cause that has nothing to do with them? Khilafat movement had nothing to do with Bharat. It had everything to do with the Muslim identity whose locus was situated in the Caliphate. It had nothing to do with Bharat. Simply because you were converted and now you wish the pagans of that land, okay, to help you in the protest because it specifically serves your interest. Okay, if this isn't majoritarianism, what is? Okay, again, I would very much encourage you to do your own due diligence. Don't take my word for it. Explore the internet for multiple resources that exist. Okay, so here, Gandhi had extended an olive branch in the form of merging non-cooperation and Khilafat movement. Now his tenet of non-cooperation, now his idea of non-cooperation was accepted, but his idea of non-violence was clearly not. Okay, this is not me speaking. Okay, now let's focus on what what happened on the day of 18th of June 1921. Okay, 18th June 1921. Now we are going to get into the the beginnings of the genocide, of the riot that was perpetrated on 18th June 1921. Deputy Superintendent of Police, he visited this place of Tirurangadi because he wanted to meet this fellow Ali Musaliar. He was a Tangal. He was giving out sermons. He was encouraging people and inciting the the spirit of violence amongst them. Okay. So now, from July 24 onwards, knife-wielding Khilafat volunteers in their khaki uniforms would march frequently on the streets with their leaders in groups of 50 to 100 to attend Khilafat meetings. Now the Moplas had become very much conscious about the Khilafat issue. Okay, Khilafat for them was the fight to save the Islamic seat that was Caliphate in Turkey. Okay, so now they were wielding their knives, roaming around the streets, forcing people to contribute to their movement. Okay, now I can understand if they force the Muslims because it is their cause. I'm not blaming them to stand up for their cause. Why exactly would they force the pagan to stand up for their cause? And on top of that, they were wielding their knives. How do you justify this? Okay, so now whenever the police or the law authorities would come to the help of the pagans to not forcefully elicit their compliance, what would they do? They would come out in large numbers and threaten the police as well. Okay, so now this is the district collector E.F. Thomas of that particular place asking for reinforcement of the police force, meaning the police force that was stationed in that particular area, they weren't enough to take care of these outrages. Okay, this is District Collector E.F. Thomas writing, not me. We have and for a bad time in Arnad. I feel powerless with my present force. We have peace now on a precarious tenure, only if we make no move. It is with full sense of responsibility, as it is with the deepest regret, that I inform government that the situation is beyond the district officials. We cannot go on as we are with the peace only so long as we remain inert. Crime has been committed and remains unpunished. This is, my argument. The extent of crime that has gone unpunished is staggering. Okay, there has been no accountability, no acknowledgement whatsoever, and we are functioning under the assumption that whatever was done was political. There's nothing to look into it. Okay, so this is him writing that we need more forces. The people are getting aggressive, the people are getting uneasy. It will be difficult to maintain peace with the forces that we have. Okay, and whose life was at stake here? Obviously the pagan neighbors. Okay, now, inevitably, after such request, the forces arrived. Okay, the forces arrived. They arrested this particular individual, Ali Musaliar. They took him back, and not exactly arrested. They summoned him to appear in front of them and to issue a statement. Okay. Now he refused to appear before the authorities. He was like, "Okay, you cannot arrest me." He refused to appear before the authorities, and on 14th August 1921, okay, a regiment of Gurkhas arrived in the early hours of 20th August 1921 for arrest of 24 accused and to search the houses in Tirurangadi. Reinforcements were also kept ready in Bangalore should the need arise. Although the Mambra mosque was not searched, rumors were spread by the Moplas that the mosque had been attacked and razed to the ground. Okay, so on the request of the district collector, the reinforcements had arrived. They had taken some people into their remand to, interrogate them, to have a chat with them about the precarious law and order situation was there in, Now what it did was, it spread the rumor that the authorities had entered into a mosque and defiled it. It was a rumor. No British records mentioned that the forces had entered the mosque. So this was the tipping point that was needed for the Moplas. They needed some reasons to attack full-fledged, and they are going to use this as a pretext to perpetrate the violence that we'll discuss in the upcoming video in this series. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching.